Hi guys, so this video is going to go over chapter 10 from criminology. This chapter is going to cover violent crimes. So there's two types of violence that are important to look at. We have what's first expressive violence. Expressive violence is just violence that's not for profit or for gain. It's used to vent anger or frustration. One example of this would be Dylan Roof, who walked in and was charged with 33 federal hate crimes for walking into a church in South Carolina and then killing the predominantly male or predominantly African American congregation. Instrumental violence. This is rational and controlled. It's purposeful. It has a reason. For example, improve financial or social position of the criminal. This would be like armed robbery or murder for hire. There's a purpose and it's thoughtful. Although that's weird to say when we talk about crime. So, what causes violence? Well, first, personal traits. When we study crime and we study the individuals who are participating in violent crime, there are some personal traits that are common amongst these individuals. You can see those through like EEGs and MRIs. Essentially, there's some brain abnormalities. We also know that one of the biggest indicators of violence is early childhood or violence towards animals. Someone who's aggressive towards an animal or violent towards an animal or may have killed an animal are likely to participate in violent crimes later in life. Childhood abuse and neglect, punishment, like physical punishment, and I'm not just talking about like a spanking here or there, but actually being like abused or beaten or being significantly neglected has ties and has led to violence as an adult. We talk about the cycle of violence. What this suggests is that a child who has a history of physical abuse is predisposed to becoming violent as an adult. Human instinct. Violence has been around for as long as people have been around. If you need something bad enough, violence is one way that humans have always reacted. So when we talk about looking back at the earliest humans, they would become violent and they would react with violence if they felt threatened. Exposure to violence. People who are constantly exposed to violence at home or school, they may become violent themselves. Racial, like African American citizens are often forced to live in poverty areas, which exposes their risk to, or their exposure to violence, which increases their risk of becoming violent as adults. Substance abuse. Substance abuse leads to violence just because, whether it's in response to needing to get drugs. So if they are becoming sick and they need something to help them fight off their sickness from lack of drugs, they may become violent, or just using the drug itself. Binge drinking has a high rate of crime. If somebody is participating in binge drinking, their decision making has gone down. Therefore, they're more likely to engage in violent crimes. Firearm availability, pretty simply put, if there's a firearm available, somebody is more likely to use it. And although there's tons and far more people who are responsible with their firearms, there are those individuals who, just because they have access to a firearm, may use it. And when I'm saying that, I'm talking about more about, like, think about your school shooters. They typically don't actually legally own those guns, but because it's available, they decided to use it, and they acted out on their violent tendencies through a firearm or with a firearm. So cultural values. If you are raised in a culture that participates or values violence, you are more likely to do so. I'm talking about like gang mentality here. If you idolize or you participate in gangs, then you are more likely to value violence. And national values. There are countries that have higher rates of violence just because of their nation, and that's what their nation values more so. With this, I'm talking about like third world countries and things of that nature. So the first violent crime we're going to look at is rape. A common law definition is a female who is forcibly taken against her will. As common law, it was also written that it was a male raping a female. Obviously, we know that as times have changed, we can now understand that same-sex rapes do happen. Many psychiatrists, criminologists, professionals in the field, they historically had viewed rape as a sexual crime, but now we're looking more at it's violence, and it's a way for an individual to participate in a violent act. So the UCR reports that there are about 90,000 rapes each year. We know that that's significantly underreported. Just looking at victimization surveys, they're reporting closer to 500,000 rapes each year. But the UCR is only going off of those numbers that are actually reported to the police. We know rape is a warm weather crime, meaning rapes increase in the warm weather months and decrease during the winter months. And rapes are higher in metropolitan areas. There are three types of rapists. There are anger rapists, power rapists, and sadist rapists. And this is just the motivation for that rape. Types of rape include date rape. When we talk about date rape, we're talking about two people who are engaging in some sort of date, and many times it's going to happen like on that first date. However, there are date rapes that occur later on in the relationship after multiple dates or after a long time of dating. Rape on campus, college students are at a great risk of being raped just because if you think about where a college student's going, they're going to bars and parties where things like alcohol and drugs are present, which obviously increases the likelihood of violence. Marital rape, marital rape wasn't historically recognized, but essentially marital rape is a rape, as common law would have it, a husband raping a wife. And there used to be the marital exception, which meant that a husband could not be charged with the rape of his wife. However, we now recognize that this might actually be more common and a sign of domestic violence and abuse. And those rapes are typically more sadistic and not a power situation. Statutory rape, you're probably familiar with this term, just somebody under that age of consent, an underage minor engaging in sex with an adult male would constitute a statutory rape. Rape by deception, although not super common, it just means that somebody could lie to put themselves in a position to engage in sex with somebody. One example the textbook gives you is that a brother who pretended to, or a man who pretended to be his brother to have sex with his brother's girlfriend. The court overturned his conviction, but rape by deception has occurred in some instances. And then finally, sex and authority relations. This is doctors and patients, professors and students. But for you, more common, what you would encounter working in this field would be an officer having sex with somebody in his custody, or like at a prison. COs cannot have sex with offenders, even though they're both adults. Because of the authority, it's automatically a rape situation. Causes of rape, evolutionary factors, meaning it's just part of who, like that individual, their biological factors. How do I say it easily? We have this ingrained need to procreate and to continue to evolve. And so some psychiatrists, psychologists believe that rape is evolutionary. Some believe that it's male socialization, that the men have been trained to be aggressive towards women. Others, the psychological abnormality, meaning it's narcissistic personality disorder, or that they're putting their needs above anybody else. They don't care who they harm as long as their needs are being met. Social learning, that they've learned it through interactions with their peers. Gender conflict, that men feel threatened by females, and so they have to assert their dominance over them. And then finally, sexual motivation. Simply put, they just want to rape a woman or a male or what have you, but it's just out of sexual motivation that they're committing that rape. So, proving rape, we've talked about this in class, it's often difficult. And it often switched from the state proving that the crime happened, but more so that the victim has to prove that they did not consent. And that's a problem in this law, in this country, and that makes proving rape more difficult. States have started to work and kind of flip that a little bit, but proving rape can be difficult, and it really does hinge on that consent. So, murder. Murder is the unlawful killing of a human with malice aforethought, meaning killing somebody but thinking about it before you do it. There are degrees of murder. First degree, which is the worst, it requires premeditation and deliberation, thinking about it, and premeditating and planning it out. Second, malice aforethought means that you are aware of what you're doing. You're aware, and you have that aforethought, meaning you've stopped. You know what you're doing. Maybe you haven't planned it out, but that malice, that intent, that evil intent is there. Manslaughter, voluntary or involuntary, are murders. They're just lesser degrees. This occurs like when negligence or wanton actions are present. And then I'm going to skip over deliberate indifference for now. Born alive. Born alive is just a doctrine that says the individual has to be born alive to be murdered. You can't murder somebody who is not born alive. Sorry, I have to start talking a little bit faster. I have to keep my videos under 15 minutes, and I'm still learning how to do this. So bear with me. I'm going to talk pretty quickly here, and then I'll have to start a new one. The murder rate has been declining, and part of that is laws. Part of that is just individuals and trends, and prosecutions increasing. Different types of murders. I'll let you go through those in your textbook if you want. Just different. Stranger murder just means stranger murdering somebody they don't know. Sexually based, self-explanatory. School murders. School murders would be like your school shootings. Serial murders. By definition, a serial murder is a person who kills 3 or more persons in 3 or more separate events. So that means that they are going out killing at least one person, going back home or what have you, going back out the next day. These are not all happening at the same time, but rather 3 separate events where they've killed at least a person. They are going back for more. They're killing more people. Mass murderers are those that are killing a large amount of people at one time. So a terrorist, the September 11th, that is a mass murder. Or the Las Vegas shooting, that is a mass murder. He's not going back multiple days and killing people, but rather killing a large number of people or more than one person at one time. I should also add that for it to be mass, it means large number of people, which by definition would be 4 or more people at one time. And then spree killers. This is a killer of multiple victims whose murders occur over a relatively short span of time and often follow no discernible pattern, meaning there's not really something that we can decipher to it. These are people who just start shooting. There were really no rhyme or reason or no explanation or pattern to be found, but they are just killing multiple people. I will stop this video here.